There are some battles that are decided before the first blow is struck. The Israelites had already lost this one in their hearts. 40 days of standing on a hillside watching a giant pace the valley floor will do that to an army. What they didn't know was that their champion was 8 miles away in a field singing to his sheep. The army of Israel was camped on a ridge in the Valley of Elah. Across from them, on the opposite ridge, was the army of the Philistines. Between the two armies was a wide stretch of open ground, a dry riverbed running through the middle of it, and the kind of silence that only happens when 10,000 men are afraid of the same thing. That thing had a name. Goliath of Gath, 9.5 feet tall, a bronze helmet on his head, a coat of armor that weighed as much as a grown man, a spear with an iron point so heavy it could crack a shield in half, and every morning for 40 days he had walked down the hill into the valley and shouted the same challenge across the open ground.
Send a man! One of you! Anyone! If he kills me, my people will be your slaves! If I kill him, you will be ours!
40 mornings, 40 challenges, and not one Israelite had moved. The king of Israel was a man named Saul. When he had been crowned, he had stood a head taller than every man in the country. He had been chosen for his strength, chosen for his stature, chosen because the people of Israel had asked God for a king who looked like one. That was years ago. Now Saul sat in his tent, hands trembling on his knees, listening to the giant outside shout for someone to come and die. His soldiers came to him every morning with the same expression on their faces. "Are you going down today, my lord?" He never answered. The truth was simple, and Saul could not say it out loud. He was the tallest man in his army. He was the king. By every rule of war, the challenge was meant for him, and he was terrified. So the silence stretched, and the giant kept laughing, and the army of Israel withered a little more each day. About a half-day's walk from the battle line in a small town called Bethlehem, an old man named Jesse sat in his courtyard and worried about his sons. 3 of them, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah, had gone to fight with King Saul. He had not heard from them in weeks. Jesse had 8 sons. The youngest of them was out in the fields right now watching the sheep. His name was David. David was probably about 15 years old. He was the runt of the family. Smaller than his brothers, less serious, less impressive on first glance. He had been left at home not because he was lazy, but because he was too young, too unproven, too far down the line of brothers to matter in a war. He didn't seem to mind. He sat in the long grass in the late afternoon with a wooden harp resting on his knee, and he sang to the sheep. Songs he had made up himself. Songs about the God of his fathers. He was not the obvious hero, but he had 2 things very few people knew about. The first was that alone in the fields, he had killed a lion with his bare hands when it tried to take a lamb. He had grabbed it by the mane and struck it down. A few months later, he had done the same to a bear. He had not told anyone. The second was that weeks earlier, the prophet Samuel had visited his father's house. When David had been brought in, the prophet had taken a horn of oil from his cloak and poured it over his head. "This is the one the Lord has chosen," Samuel had said. And David had gone back to his sheep, with oil still in his hair and a quiet feeling in his chest that he could not yet explain. One morning, his father called him in from the fields. "David, take this bread, take this cheese, take this grain, walk to the army camp and find your brothers. Bring me word." He reached the camp at the moment the army was forming up for the day. Soldiers were strapping on armor. Horns were sounding. He found his brothers in the front lines, and right at that moment, before he could even greet them, the giant stepped down into the valley and began to shout, "Where is your champion? Where is the man who will fight me? Are you all cowards?" David turned to the soldier next to him. "Who is this Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" His oldest brother heard him. Eliab snapped, "What are you doing here? Who is watching the sheep? Go home." David turned to him. "What have I done? Was it not just a question?" Word reached King Saul that a young man in the camp was talking about fighting Goliath. When David walked in, Saul looked up, and the king's heart sank a little. The young man in front of him was a boy. "My king," David said, "let no one be afraid. I will go and fight this Philistine. You can't fight him. You are a boy." "My lord, I have been keeping my father's sheep. When a lion came and took a lamb, I struck it down. The Lord who saved me from the lion will save me from this Philistine." "Go," Saul said finally, "and may the Lord be with you. Take my armor." They strapped Saul's bronze armor onto David. It was too heavy. The helmet slid over his eyes. David stood very still and said, "I cannot go in this. I have not tested it." He took the armor off. He set the sword down. He stopped at the dry riverbed and bent over. He picked up 5 smooth stones from the stream bed. He put them in the small leather pouch at his side. He took his sling in his hand, and he walked into the valley alone. Goliath saw him coming. He had imagined a general in golden armor, a prince on a horse. He had not imagined a child with a stick.
Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?
You come against me with sword and spear, but I come against you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand."
Goliath lifted his spear and began to charge. David did not freeze. He did not back up. He ran. He ran toward the giant. He took a stone from his pouch. He fitted it into the leather sling. He whirled the sling once, twice. He let the stone fly. The stone struck Goliath in the forehead, just below the rim of the bronze helmet. The giant stopped. For a moment he just stood there. Then he toppled forward slowly like a tree falling and hit the valley floor with a sound that shook the stones. The Philistine army turned and ran. The Israelite army erupted. They poured down off the ridge in a wave. The siege of 40 days was over. The boy who had ended it walked back to King Saul's tent, sweat in his hair, a giant sword on his shoulder. Saul watched him come. The king did not yet know it, but the young man walking toward him would one day sit on his throne, would one day write half the songs that the people of Israel would sing for the next 3,000 years, would one day be called a man after God's own heart. The story of David and Goliath is not really a story about a small person beating a big one. It is a story about what happens when one person believes God is bigger than the thing in front of them. The Israelite army had everything an army needs: numbers, weapons, training, a king. By every measurement, they should have been winning, but they were measuring wrong. They were measuring Goliath against themselves. And against themselves, Goliath was unbeatable. David walked into the same valley and saw the same giant. He had no armor, he had no sword. By every measurement, he should have died in that valley. But he was measuring differently. He was measuring Goliath against God. And against God, Goliath was a man. That is what changed. There is a giant somewhere in your life right now. It is the thing you have been staring at across the valley for weeks or months or years. It is not too big. It is just too big for you alone. The 5 smooth stones don't matter. The sling doesn't matter. The size of the giant doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is who you are walking with when you step into the valley. David walked with God. That is why a boy with a stone could change the history of a nation, and that is why your giant, whatever it is, has a name and a date on it. The name is fear. The date is the day you decide to walk down the hill. If this story moved you, give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who is staring at a giant of their own today. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you never miss the next story. We are on a mission to bring every chapter of Scripture to life, one cinematic story at a time.